It had been a long shift at the small but lively diner just outside Oakland, California. The warm glow of the neon sign flickered through the evening drizzle, casting a soft golden hue onto the rain-speckled pavement. Inside, the scent of sizzling burgers, freshly brewed coffee, and warm maple syrup mixed with the subtle aroma of nostalgia. This was the kind of place that had been around for decades, where the waitresses knew their regulars and the walls held whispered secrets of 1,000 untold stories. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For Janelle Carter, the day had been like any other. She had been on her feet since noon, balancing steaming plates and refilling coffee cups with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Janelle loved her job, not because it paid well, because it didn't, and not because she had dreamt of being a waitress when she was a child. She loved it because of the people. Each customer had a story, and while she didn't always hear them, she saw glimpses of their lives in the way they ordered their meals, in the way they sipped their coffee, in the brief moments of humanity that happened between bites of food. That night, as she wiped down the counter, she barely registered the tall man walking through the door until she heard the hushed murmurs that spread across the room like ripples in a pond. She glanced up, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, was none other than Stephen Curry. Janelle had seen celebrities before. Living near Oakland, it wasn't unusual to have a famous athlete or musician pass through, but something about seeing Steph Curry in her little diner on an unremarkable Wednesday night sent a jolt of excitement through her. He wasn't just a basketball player. He was a legend, a hometown hero, a man who carried the weight of a city's dreams on his shoulders with effortless grace. He smiled at her as he approached a booth in the corner, his presence both magnetic and disarmingly humble. He wasn't surrounded by an entourage. There were no cameras flashing, no reporters trailing behind him. Just him, in the quiet simplicity of a diner that smelled like bacon grease and freshly baked pies. Janelle smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and walked over with a practiced smile. "Welcome in! What can I get for you tonight?" Steph looked up at her with that familiar boyish grin, the one that had made him a fan favorite long before he ever won championships. "Hey there," he said warmly. "I'll take the cheeseburger with fries and a chocolate milkshake." "A classic," she replied with a small laugh, scribbling down his order. "You want the fries extra crispy?" He nodded appreciatively. "You read my mind." She walked away, her heart still thudding against her ribs, as she placed the order in the kitchen. She couldn't help but sneak another glance in his direction. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't trying to keep a low profile. He was just sitting there, drumming his fingers against the table in a quiet rhythm, like any other customer winding down after a long day. When his food was ready, she brought it over and set the plate down in front of him. "Here you go," she said. "Hope you like it." He looked up, his eyes warm with gratitude. "I'm sure I will. Thanks, Janelle." She froze for a half second. Had he just said her name? She glanced down and realized her name tag was pinned to her apron. Of course. Still, there was something about the way he said it. Like he actually cared. Like she wasn't just another face in the crowd. As the night wore on, the diner slowly emptied. Janelle kept busy, clearing tables and making sure the coffee stayed fresh. But she couldn't shake the surreal feeling of serving Steph Curry. He lingered longer than most customers, sipping his milkshake, watching the late-night news on the mounted TV, just soaking in the atmosphere. When he finally signaled for the check, Janelle brought it over, her hands oddly clammy. She didn't expect a big tip. Celebrities could be unpredictable when it came to things like that. Some left extravagant tips, others barely left anything. She wasn't going to get her hopes up. "Thanks for stopping by," she said as she handed him the bill. "Thank you for the great service," he replied sincerely. She nodded and stepped back, letting him take his time. A few moments later, he slid the check back across the table with his credit card tucked inside. Janelle retrieved it, rang it up, and then, as she always did, she flipped the bill open to see the tip. And then she froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The number staring back at her was impossibly large, far beyond anything she had ever seen on a tip before. $5,000. Her vision blurred. A lump rose in her throat. She blinked rapidly, forcing herself to focus. There was a note scribbled on the receipt in neat handwriting. "Thank you for your kindness. Keep shining. God bless. Steph. Janelle clutched the paper in trembling fingers, her chest tightening as tears welled in her eyes. She had been struggling. Rent was overdue. Bills were piling up. Her mother was sick, and the medical expenses were crushing her. She had been working extra shifts just to keep her head above water, but it never seemed to be enough. And now, in one unexpected, extraordinary moment, everything had changed. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. The weight of exhaustion, of stress, of silent prayers whispered in the dark. All of it came crashing down in that instant. When she finally looked up, Steph was watching her with a soft smile. He didn't say anything, didn't expect a grand reaction. He just nodded as if to say, "You deserve this." She wiped her eyes quickly and walked over, her voice breaking. Thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "Just take care of yourself." She stood there for a moment, absorbing the sheer kindness of the gesture. Then, in an impulse she couldn't control, she threw her arms around him in a tight hug. He chuckled but hugged her back without hesitation. "Thank you," she whispered again, because it was all she could say. As he walked out of the diner and disappeared into the night, Janelle stood there, still clutching the receipt, tears streaming down her face. The diner felt different now, like it had been touched by something bigger than just a simple act of generosity. That night, as she walked home, she held the receipt close to her heart. Not just because of the money, though that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet fathom, but because of the reminder that kindness still existed in the world, that there were people who saw you, even when you felt invisible, that sometimes miracles didn't come with flashing lights or grand announcements. They came quietly, in the form of a burger, fries, and a note on a check that made the world feel a little bit brighter. And as she stepped into her tiny apartment, she let herself believe, for the first time in a long time, that things were going to be okay. The following weeks passed in a blur, but the moment in the diner remained imprinted in Janelle's mind like an ink stain that refused to fade. She had never experienced anything quite like it. A small act of generosity that had transformed into a tidal wave of change in her life. It wasn't just the money, though, that was undoubtedly a blessing. It was the validation, the feeling of being seen, the realization that kindness could find its way into even the most unexpected corners of life. She hadn't told anyone. She had tucked the receipt away in her bedside drawer, running her fingers over Steph Curry's handwriting every night before she went to sleep. It felt too sacred to share. It was hers, this moment of unexpected grace, and she didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. But secrets had a way of slipping through the cracks, especially in a town like hers, where everyone knew everyone. One evening, a few days after the encounter, her best friend and co-worker, Rosa, noticed something different about her. "You look lighter," Rosa commented as they cleaned up after a long shift. "Like you're not carrying the weight of the world on your back anymore." Janelle hesitated, her fingers tightening around the damp rag she was using to wipe down the counter. She wanted to tell Rosa. She wanted to shout it to the world, but she also feared that speaking it aloud would somehow make it less real. Finally, she sighed, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "Something happened the other night," she admitted. "Steph Curry came in." Rosa's eyes widened. "No way! The Steph Curry? What was he like? Did he leave a good tip? Tell me everything." Janelle hesitated again before reaching into her apron pocket where she had started keeping a photocopy of the receipt. Just a small reminder that it had actually happened. She handed it to Rosa, watching as her friend's mouth fell open in shock. $5,000? Rosa practically screeched, her voice echoing through the empty diner. "Are you kidding me, girl? This is life-changing." Janelle smiled, her heart swelling at Rosa's excitement. "I know," she whispered. "I still can't believe it." Rosa grabbed her shoulders, shaking her lightly. "So what are you going to do with it? Are you finally going to get out of this place? Maybe go back to school or take a vacation? God knows you deserve one." Janelle exhaled, the weight of her reality settling back onto her shoulders. "Honestly, I don't know yet. There are bills to pay, rent, and my mom, she's been needing more medical treatment. This money means I don't have to choose between keeping the lights on and taking care of her." Rosa's excitement softened into something more tender. "You're always thinking about everyone else." she said quietly. You deserve something for yourself too, Janelle. Janelle knew that, in theory, but life had never given her the luxury of selfishness. The news of Steph's act of kindness spread faster than she anticipated. A few days later, a local journalist caught wind of the story and stopped by the diner, asking for an interview. At first, Janelle wanted to decline. This wasn't about fame, and she didn't want to be paraded around as some charity case. But then she thought about how stories like these mattered, about how people needed to be reminded that goodness still existed in the world. So she sat down for the interview. She told them about the long hours, the struggles, the moment she saw the receipt and felt her world tilt on its axis. She spoke not just about the money, but about the kindness behind it, about how it had restored something in her she hadn't realized she had lost: hope. The article went viral. Suddenly, strangers were reaching out, offering their support. Some left extra large tips when they came to the diner. Others sent messages of encouragement. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after that fateful night, Janelle's manager called her into the back office. She had never been summoned to the office before, and her stomach twisted with nerves. Had someone complained? Was she in trouble? She knocked hesitantly before pushing the door open. Her manager, a gruff man named Hank, was sitting behind his desk, rubbing his temples as if he couldn't believe what he was about to say. You're quitting, aren't you? He grumbled. Janelle blinked. What? Hank sighed, tossing a newspaper onto the desk. This story has been everywhere. People are saying you're going to use that money to move on to bigger and better things. Janelle stared at the paper, her own face looking back at her. I don't know what I'm doing yet, she admitted. Hank leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're one of the best waitresses I've ever had, he said gruffly. I'd hate to lose you, but if this money gives you a way out, you should take it. She appreciated the sentiment, but the truth was she wasn't sure where out even was. That night, she sat in her small apartment staring at the check she had finally deposited into her bank account. It was surreal. For the first time in years, she wasn't drowning. The bills were paid. Her mother's medication was covered. There was even a little left over, enough to dream. She picked up her phone and hesitated before dialing a number she hadn't called in years. Janelle? The voice on the other end was hesitant, surprised. Hey, Aunt Viv, she said, her voice catching slightly. I was wondering, is that nursing program you mentioned still open for applications? There was a pause, then an excited squeal. Oh, honey, yes, it is! Are you thinking about applying? Janelle exhaled, a small smile forming. Yeah, I think I am. The truth was, she had always wanted to be a nurse. She had loved the idea of helping people, of making a difference, but life had taken her down a different path, one where survival came before dreams. Now, for the first time, she had a choice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Janelle applied to the nursing program using the money to cover tuition costs. She reduced her hours at the diner, allowing herself time to study. It was terrifying, stepping into the unknown, but it was exhilarating too. One evening, after a long shift, she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Janelle, it's Steph. Her breath hitched. Steph, Curry? He chuckled. Yeah, I saw the article about you going back to school. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Janelle felt a lump rise in her throat. You don't have to say that. I mean it, he said. You were always meant for something bigger. I just gave a small push. The rest? That's all you. She swallowed the sudden emotion swelling in her chest. Thank you for everything. You don't have to thank me, he said. Just promise me something. Anything. Keep shining. And just like that, he was gone. But the impact of his words, of his kindness, would stay with her forever. Months passed. Janelle worked tirelessly, balancing her studies with her job. It wasn't easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. She met other students who had their own struggles, their own reasons for pursuing this path. She made friends. She learned. She grew. One evening, as she sat in the library, flipping through her textbooks, she looked up at the framed copy of that fateful receipt she had placed in her study nook. She traced her fingers over the words again. Keep shining. A smile touched her lips. She would. She always would. Janelle's life began to take a shape she had never envisioned. For so long, her world had been defined by limitations. What she couldn't afford, what she didn't have time for, what she could never dream of achieving. But now, for the first time, doors that once seemed permanently closed were cracking open, inviting her to step through. Her nursing classes were rigorous, more challenging than anything she had taken on before. The human body was a complex, intricate puzzle, and every night she found herself buried in textbooks, deciphering its mysteries. She loved it. Every late night study session, every test that made her stomach twist with nerves, every moment spent in the simulation labs practicing patient care, it all reaffirmed that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Yet transitioning into this new life wasn't seamless. There were days when exhaustion from working shifts at the diner collided with the demands of her coursework, leaving her drained. There were moments of doubt, times when she questioned whether she was strong enough, smart enough, capable enough to succeed in this unfamiliar world. But then she would think back to that night, to the simple note on the receipt, and she would remind herself, keep shining. Janelle's mother, Teresa, was her biggest supporter. Even in the throes of illness, when her body betrayed her with fatigue and pain, she never stopped encouraging her daughter. I knew you were meant for something greater, Teresa whispered one evening as Janelle sat by her bedside reviewing her anatomy notes. Her mother's voice was weaker now, but her eyes shone with pride. I just didn't know when the world would finally see it. Janelle swallowed the lump in her throat. She wished she could promise her mother a lifetime of health and happiness. Wished she could take away the pain. But what she could do was work toward a future where she would never again have to choose between paying for medical care and buying groceries. As weeks turned into months, whispers of her story continued to ripple outward. Social media carried it far beyond her small community, and soon, organizations dedicated to supporting aspiring nurses reached out to her. A prominent nursing scholarship foundation took interest in her journey and invited her to apply. You have an inspiring story, the program director told her over a Zoom call. We want to help you see it through. When she received the acceptance email a month later, confirming that her tuition for the next 2 years would be fully covered, she broke down in tears. The money from Steph Curry's generous tip had set the foundation, but now she had the means to complete the journey without financial burden weighing her down. She had never felt so seen, so valued. One thing Janelle hadn't anticipated was the way her story would inspire others. Strangers began reaching out, people who had once been in her shoes. Waitresses, single parents, struggling students. Some simply wanted to share their admiration, while others sought advice. How had she taken that one moment of generosity and turned it into a stepping stone for something greater? I just took a chance, she found herself saying over and over, and I refused to let fear stop me. One afternoon, a high school girl named Maya came into the diner with her mother. They had driven an hour just to meet her. You don't know me, Maya said, twisting her fingers nervously, but I read about your story. I want to be a nurse too, but I thought it wasn't possible. Janelle reached across the table and took the girl's hands in hers. It is possible, she said firmly. I promise you that. From that day forward, Janelle made it her mission to pay it forward. She started mentoring young women who, like her, had dreams bigger than their circumstances. She spoke at community centers, sharing her journey not as a story of luck, but of resilience. You never know who's watching, she told a group of students one evening. You never know whose life you might touch, whose path you might change, just by being who you are. One crisp autumn morning, as she was heading to class, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Janelle Carter? The deep voice on the other end asked. Yes, she said cautiously. This is David Stern from ESPN. We're doing a feature on Steph Curry's impact off the court, and we'd love to include your story. Janelle nearly dropped her phone. ESPN? National coverage? She wasn't sure she was ready for something so huge. I don't know, she said hesitantly. I don't really like the attention. David chuckled. I get it. But your story is bigger than you now. It's inspiring people, and I think Steph would love to see how you've used that moment to change your life. At the mention of Steph, she felt her heart squeeze. He had given her a gift, and she had never expected anything in return. Maybe this was her chance to show him just how much his kindness had mattered. Okay, she said, exhaling slowly. I'll do it. A few weeks later, Janelle found herself in front of cameras, recounting the moment that had changed her life. She spoke about the struggles before that night, about the quiet desperation she had hidden behind her customer service smile. She spoke about the power of kindness, how one act had created a ripple effect she never could have imagined. When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages flooded her social media. Encouragement, admiration, stories of people who had also been touched by unexpected generosity. And then, one message stood out. It was from Steph Curry himself. "You did this, Janelle. All I did was leave a tip. Keep shining." She stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible." Graduation day came faster than she expected. Janelle stood on stage in her crisp white nursing uniform, clutching her diploma as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had done it. She had crossed the finish line. As she stepped down from the stage, her mother, frail but beaming, wrapped her in a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you," Teresa whispered. At the reception that followed, Janelle found herself surrounded by people who had been part of her journey. Her co-workers from the diner, her classmates, her professors. And then a familiar voice made her freeze. "Didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" She turned around and there he was. Steph Curry standing just a few feet away, grinning. Janelle blinked. Sure, she was imagining things. How did you... He shrugged. "Saw your story, figured I had to come see for myself." Emotions overwhelmed her, and before she could stop herself, she hugged him tightly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said simply, "by proving that one act of kindness can change the world." That night, as she sat in her new apartment, her first real home, she pulled out the old faded receipt one last time. She didn't need to keep it anymore. The message was forever imprinted in her heart. She smiled, whispering the words softly to herself. Keep shining. And she would, now and always. The weeks after graduation felt like stepping into a brand new world. Janelle had spent so long fighting for stability, pushing through long nights and exhaustion, that the idea of finally standing at the starting line of her dream was both exhilarating and terrifying. The weight of uncertainty had been replaced by a different kind of pressure, the pressure of beginning something entirely new. Her first job offer came from a well-respected hospital in San Francisco. It wasn't a glamorous position. She would be working the night shift in the emergency department, tending to patients in crisis. The thought of it made her pulse quicken. The ER was a place of chaos, of adrenaline and rapid decisions. It was where lives were saved or lost in the blink of an eye. Janelle accepted the offer without hesitation. Her night on the job, she stood in the bright fluorescent hallway, her new scrubs stiff against her skin, her stethoscope cool against her chest. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency. She took a deep breath, grounding herself in the moment. This was it. Everything she had fought for had led her here. A senior nurse, Maria, greeted her with a reassuring smile. You ready for this, rookie? Janelle swallowed hard. As ready as I'll ever be. That night, she witnessed more than she ever had before. A car accident victim barely clinging to life. A young child burning with fever, his mother's eyes wide with fear. An elderly man who had simply run out of time. The ER was relentless, a whirlwind of human fragility, resilience, and heartbreak. Janelle moved through the night with careful determination. She helped where she could, learning, adapting, pushing herself past the fear. Every patient was a reminder of why she had chosen this path. Every moment, no matter how difficult, reaffirmed that she belonged here. At the end of her shift, as the sun began to rise over the city, she stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air. Exhausted but exhilarated, she realized something. She had never felt more alive. A few weeks into her new job, as she adjusted to the rhythm of hospital life, Janelle received a phone call she never expected. Janelle, it's Rosa. Her best friend's voice crackled through the line. You need to come back to the diner. Something's happening. Janelle's stomach tightened. She hadn't been back since she'd quit to focus on nursing school. The diner had been a huge part of her life, but she had been afraid to return, afraid that stepping through those doors would make her feel like she had never left. Rosa, Just come, Rosa interrupted. Trust me. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Janelle made her way to the familiar little restaurant. The neon sign still flickered the way it always had, the smell of grease and coffee still lingering in the air. She pushed open the door, and what she saw made her freeze. The diner was packed, not just with customers, but with people she recognized. Co-workers from her past, classmates from nursing school, community members who had followed her journey. At the center of it all stood a familiar face, Steph Curry. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. What is going on? Steph grinned. motioning for her to come forward. As she did, Rosa stepped beside her, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "This," Rosa said, gesturing around, "is a celebration of you." Janelle's head spun. She looked at Steph, bewildered. "You did this?" Steph shrugged. "Nah, this was all them. I just got the invite." Rosa clapped her hands. "After your ESPN story, people wanted to do something for you, so we pulled this together. Everyone here has been touched by your kindness, your determination. We wanted you to know that." Tears pricked Janelle's eyes as she scanned the room. There was Maya, the high school student she had mentored. There was her nursing professor, the one who had encouraged her to keep pushing forward. There were regulars from the diner who had left extra tips when she was struggling. It was a room filled with love. She turned back to Steph, still overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." Steph smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just take it in." Janelle did just that. She let herself be surrounded by warmth, by the people who had been part of her journey. For so long, she had carried the weight of the world on her own shoulders. But tonight, she understood something. She had never been alone. In the weeks that followed, Janelle felt a deep desire to give back. She had been given an opportunity, a second chance at a life she had once believed was out of reach. Now she wanted to ensure that others had the same chance. She started small, setting up a scholarship fund for aspiring nurses from underprivileged backgrounds. She knew firsthand how daunting it was to chase a dream when financial burdens loomed overhead. She wanted to be a lifeline for others, just as Steph's kindness had been a lifeline for her. She reached out to hospitals and clinics, connecting with programs that provided mentorship for young people interested in healthcare. She spoke at schools, sharing her story not as an extraordinary tale, but as proof that determination and kindness could change everything. One afternoon, she received an email from a woman named Lila. "Janelle, I don't know if you remember me, but I came into the diner a year ago when I was struggling to put myself through school. You encouraged me not to give up. I just wanted to tell you, I graduate next month, and I have you to thank for it. You showed me that dreams are possible. Thank you for believing in me." Janelle stared at the email, her heart swelling. She had once been the one searching for hope. Now she was the one giving it. A year later, Janelle had fully embraced her role as a nurse. The ER had become her second home, the place where she found purpose every day. One evening, as she rushed between patients, she nearly collided with a man being wheeled in on a stretcher. His face was pale, pain evident in his expression, and then recognition struck her. "Mr. Thompson?" she breathed. It was one of her old customers from the diner, an elderly man who had always come in for coffee and a slice of pie. He had been one of her favorite regulars, always slipping her an extra $1 and telling her to keep her chin up. He blinked up at her. "Janelle, is that really you?" She took his hand. "It's me." A small, pained smile tugged at his lips. "Knew you were meant for more than serving coffee." Tears stung her eyes. "And I never forgot what you used to tell me. You're going to be okay, Mr. Thompson. I'll take care of you." And she did. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Janelle sat on a park bench, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The weight of her journey sat heavy on her shoulders, but it was a good weight, the kind that reminded her of everything she had overcome. Her phone buzzed. A text from Steph. "Heard about the scholarship fund. Proud of you." She smiled, typing back. "All I did was pay forward what you started." His response came almost instantly. "That's how it works. One act of kindness at a time." Janelle leaned back, staring at the sky. He was right. It had all started with a simple moment, a note on a check. But the ripple effect had been endless. And as she sat there in the city that had once felt like an impossible place to thrive, she realized something. She had not only kept shining, she had become a light for others, and she would never stop. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on the black waitress serving Steph Curry and her reaction? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.